An exciting day. Delight to host this group here. My name is Sayra. I'm with Moveworks. I lead up our customer executive engagement. What does that mean? I support our customer advisory board, product advisory board. Some of you may have seen me at .locals, the regional hackathons. I also run a lot of executive roundtables. And through these engagements, I started learning about AI governance. And it seems like it runs the gamut, right? On the one hand, I have someone who runs Azure, and by default, they're running AI governance for an organization. On the other end of the spectrum, it's the whole entire C-suite. So what's the right balance? Does that make sense to have such a broad spectrum? Now, there are some organizations like the EU who's come up with these frameworks. So this is called the hourglass model. There are three layers: the environmental layer, right? The high level regulatory level. There's the organizational layer. And then there's the below that is the infrastructure, the system layer. So what we're going to focus on today is the organization and the system governance. So with that, I have some friends up here who can introduce themselves.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jordan Sternlieb. I'm with West Monroe. I've been in business and technology consulting for about 20 years. Right now, I lead our Los Angeles office at West Monroe. Spent a lot of my career in different industries, but specifically financial services, and spending more time in healthcare, utilities, private equity, industries like that. But have been spending my career working with our clients in automation and process improvements and those sorts of things. And now certainly AI is a big part of it. So I'm going to provide a little bit of a perspective of what we've seen at some of our clients in those different industries, and look forward to all of your questions as well.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Rooney. I'm the CIO at West Monroe, and as Jordan will talk about what West Monroe does for clients, I'll talk a little bit more about what our organization does for West Monroe. We are a 2,000 person strong business and technology consulting firm. We've got 9 offices in the United States. We've got resources in Costa Rica and an office in London. I came to West Monroe from Gartner as an executive partner, and actually when I was there, I used to think one of the hardest jobs in the country must be to be CIO at Gartner, because 50,000 people know how to do your job. And now I find myself as a CIO for a business and technology consulting firm. But West Monroe, honestly, is different because it's of how collaborative we are. It is really about we bring together industry expertise and functional expertise, whether industry expertise like in healthcare or in high tech and software, manufacturing, life sciences. There's 7 of them that we focus on. And then we have functional expertise in M&A or customer experience or organization and people, change management. And then we bring the tech in terms of data analytics, cyber, AI, those sorts of things. So we really think about it collaboratively, so which that helps me because then my team is collaborative with those who are working with clients. But we go one step beyond that. We are collaborative and co-create with our clients. So our culture is different from a business technology services standpoint, results in an 85 NPS, which is something we're very proud of. So that's my role and a lot more about West Monroe, just because he said, I can't stop talking about our company.
That's okay. But before we dive straight into the topic, tell us about that little bot that's up there.
That little bot?
Yeah.
That little bot is West Monroe Bot. And we launched Moveworks in 2023. And the origin story of the name was literally, everyone names them, right? You've heard 3 or 4 names. Databricks was great, R2DB, right? A group of our folks who are doing the launch for Moveworks were in, and our comms person was sitting there, and someone said, "What the heck do we name the West Monroe Bot?" And she just looked at them, West Monroe Bot. So that's the name. It's evolved. It's friendly, as you can see, and has a certain character. Our first value at West Monroe is be humans, which is funny now that's a bot, but the bot has its personality as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. So I imagine the topic of governance is nothing new to either of you or many of our audience here. So could you compare and contrast in terms of what's very similar to some of the other governance that's within organization and what's different, what's unique?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Kevin, if that's okay. Yeah, I think it's not that different on the surface. I mean, ultimately, I think what you're trying to achieve with AI and the bot in this specific case within your organization has to align with the strategic objectives of where your organization's going, the biggest priorities within your organization. And Kevin's an ex-chief strategy officer, so he'll definitely agree with me in that whatever you're doing has to align with the overall strategy of your organization, and the more you can align with that, the better. But making sure you've got the right priorities, the right use cases that align with that, and frankly, in my experience, kind of starting to look at where you get the most bang for your buck. So the more you can bring in the business justification, however you measure that, is really important into the governance process. So is it dollars and cents savings because let's call it your HR team can be focused on other more important value-added projects so that they're not addressing, certain, certain questions all the time over and over again that could be easily addressed by automation or a bot? Or is it something different? Is it from a risk perspective? Is it scalability? Is it just usage, frankly, and looking at opportunities to move things or do things more efficiently, faster, better? Bringing that business case, business justification into it, I think is really important as you start to prioritize.
Yeah, I think other things that are similar. I mean, really good governance. When you think about governance, sometimes you think about the bureaucracy and what slows things down. But I've been told we talk about things like AI being able to provide a frictionless experience for our consultants. And the more I thought about it, frictionless is bad. Good friction. You want good friction in governance so that you have the right guidelines and the right box and people understand like where they're playing and the why, right? So that you can drive some innovation on the edges, but you can do it in a way that they understand where those boundaries are, what the guidelines are, what the risk and compliances are, what the platforms are, so that when you also bring that innovation in and you harden it and you scale it, it's brought in and you have a governance structure where the tools and the frameworks and the architecture all work to make sure that you can then scale it when it comes. So the governance provides a lot of that information on the who, the what, the why.
So with that, Kevin, can you tell us in terms of how you got started developing your specific AI governance for West Monroe?
So a couple things. As a business and technology consulting firm, we're actually born in tech, we say. We're definitely a group of deep technologists are part of the organization. We knew that we had to be out in front in terms of this AI thing. So we quickly formed both an innovation budget, and then around there we formed an AI Center of Excellence. And that AI Center of Excellence brought together, just like how we're formed from an operating model, a whole bunch of our deep technologists, along with industry experts in terms of making sure that we understood where the industry was, where the tooling was, how things were changing. And their main focus to start, honestly, was how do we leverage AI to help our clients, both from helping you execute on AI in terms of everything from governance to the technology, and then also how we leverage it from a sales enablement standpoint to be able to do things better, faster, higher quality. So that was the main focus of the governance structure to start with.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and I think you guys came up with a specific model yourself, correct?
Yeah, I think this is one example I think we could just use, and every organization behaves and exists a little bit differently. So I think this is a good foundation starting point that you can kind of adapt to your organization. But ultimately, we talked a little bit about this already, but how does it align with your corporate strategy? And also, my experience tells us that the biggest thing you're going to hear is what are the risks of this? How is it going to impact security, privacy, compliance, those sorts of things? So making sure there's a risk element of this as well, and making sure you're armed and prepared to address that. I think many of you around the room are already customers and have maybe gotten over some of those barriers, but with more and more enhancements, the technology is changing quickly. Internal audit, the regulators, if you're in a regulated industry, are going to continue to ask questions about this. So I think it's an important thing that we've seen, especially working with utilities, banks, and in healthcare.
Yeah.
Having the right documentation around your governance processes and how you're addressing some of those risks are really important. But starting there, but then also kind of going down from there, as Say pointed out, kind of at the operational level. How do you have the right oversight, support, and then the folks that are actually performing, that are doing the work and coming up with the use cases and starting to get the value. One piece of this that I do want to call out, because I think it's critical, as I think about being in all of your shoes, is the education, the training, the communication around all this. I think that's maybe one thing that I would highlight. Not that it's different than any other thing you roll out within your organization that's important and strategic, but I think getting people comfortable with the tools, over-educating, investing more in that implementation and change management, I think is critical to really capture the value. I think the one mistake a lot of organizations make is they invest a lot in a great solution and a product, but then when it comes to rolling it out and getting everybody to adopt it, they underinvest, and you don't get the true return on that investment. So that's one thing I would emphasize, making sure all of you play an important role in evangelizing it within your organization, making sure you've got champions that are communicating it, and I don't know. I don't think there's any. I don't think you can over communicate too much in terms of kind of some of the value and the wins you can get using the AI as an example.
So with some of that, were there any inputs? Were there any consideration in terms of did you evaluate your organization in terms of, are we ready for AI? Do we have to do some enablement around our team, our colleagues around AI?
Yes. So I think one of the first steps in terms of getting started is ensuring that you're aligned from a strategic and an executive sponsor standpoint. Those are two of the first things to see if you're organizationally ready for the change. Those two were an easy yes for us, honestly. The harder one, honestly, is around where we were from a skills development and honestly from a culture change standpoint. You can't underestimate when you introduce new technology, something like this, where it is by definition going to ask people to change how they work and change how they think about solving problems. And if nothing else, we are problem solvers. It is, some of that is ingrained, especially in those of us who've done professional services for 10, 20 years. So building out both the skills that were needed, having executives that model the behavior, having a whole certification process, having personas based on the type of person that you were. So executives have things like ethics and AI as part of our training. So there's a lot of considerations in there, and those are still evolving for us. And then you get all the way down to the point of like measures and performance indications. Biggest measure in professional services, billable hours. What happens when someone can do it in half the time? Does that mean they're half as good as the other person? No, we've got to solve that, right? Because the quality's better and the delivery's better.
Yeah. You alluded to this earlier in terms of, what's the strategy? How does it align? Were there some business objectives that you had to consider? What were some of those inputs?
I can talk about it from a client perspective. So oftentimes the clients I work with are really looking for opportunities to better serve their end clients. And so that's really been, I think, the most common use case, being able to, when they do have to get a phone call or an email or some sort of service request, and by the way, maybe a step before all of that is providing better tools from a self-service perspective for those end users and clients to get the answers they need so that they don't have to pick up the phone. But when they do pick up the phone or send an email, being able to resolve those things quickly, being able to search your knowledge base for that information, and obviously those sorts of things are the biggest ones that we often see our clients want to look at. And it's something that I think we've found has been, in the scheme of things, like relatively easy to track and measure success in terms of volume of calls, how quickly they're resolved, how much they're resolved kind of on that first call resolution sort of in that status. So I think that's a big one that a lot of our clients are looking to do better and more efficiently and provide an exceptional experience. So that's one from an external perspective that we see. I don't know, Kevin, if you have something specific from an internal perspective, maybe it's the same one.
I mean, it's similar. What I would say is that from an internal perspective, I started talking about our goals around the clients and serving them better and serving more efficiently. and differentiating ourselves. But internally, look, for us, we want to make sure that our consultants are spending all of their time focusing on our clients' problems. And what that means as a CIO is that the faster I can get their computer up or the specific software that they need in real time standpoint, the better the experience is going to be for them, the better the experience is going to be for the client. So that's where Moveworks came in to do that. But as well, I have a responsibility from an SG&A standpoint to make sure that our OpEx grows at a slower rate than our revenue. And we were able to, through automation and the AI platforms, both provide the better service and drive down the cost curve too. So that was just as much a reason for us to go forward with some of these solutions.
Yeah, makes sense. As I talk to executive leaders, they are a little overwhelmed in terms of all of this AI noise. So how do you weed through that? Is that part of the
Noisily?
governance? Huh?
Noisily?
Noisily? Yeah.
It is part of the governance. I would say there's a couple things. We are on a certain part on the hype cycle, right? So every single SaaS provider is going to sprinkle their AI magical fairy dust and try and charge you more. Go with the partners that aren't trying to charge you more. We wanted to make sure that we did a few things well. So having the frameworks around what our true north is, what we're trying to do strategically really helps. It's like we want to differentiate how we deliver. We want to be able to help our clients deliver AI and become really AI enabled across the organization, skills based. And then we wanted to drive down costs. So if we look at it from that lens, and we established a consistent prioritization mechanism that took some of those things into factor, along with risk and along with change readiness, depending on where you're going. There's enough there that the rest of it in the use cases, I saw some of the last one that went to the use cases 2027, it's going to evolve. Let's focus on the three main things right there, and that helps us.
Sure, that makes sense. You mentioned use cases. How do you evaluate use cases? Because I'm sure there's so many of them. Or how do you recommend clients go through use cases, prioritize?
Yeah, I think in some cases you're lucky enough to work with clients where there's broad buy-in across the board, and you can start a little bit bigger in terms of bringing in different lines of business, and everyone kind of has their own sort of ideas and can provide priorities, and you've got the right resources to be able to deliver upon it. But oftentimes that's not really the case, and being able to start a little bit smaller with, call it a proof of concept, or pick an organization or a business unit, let's say, that's a champion of this and is excited about getting going, and you can work with them on some priorities. Again, I keep going back to the business justification, but I think that bang for the buck sort of concept from a few different perspectives, I think is really important. I think that's ultimately when it comes down to it, I'm oversimplifying it, but governance makes sure that the squeaky wheel isn't getting the resources, that you're getting the right priorities, the right ultimate end results aligned with your organization's strategy. So I think picking a few use cases, getting those in place, starting to get feedback, starting to measure the success of those, and then kind of going on to the next one and learning from those, that iterative approach, which I think is probably a common in a lot of your organizations that are maybe in technology or product companies that are used to kind of a little bit more agile, iterative sorts of approaches, I think can be really valuable. And I think we've seen really good success with that with our clients.
Yeah, sorry, just on top of that, I would say on your first option, when you get all the people in the room and not have a squeaky wheel, it's not in my purview as CIO, but it's more in Jordan's helping clients. Don't underestimate the value of having that third party in there to facilitate and be that sounding board to help voice that case for you. It is much easier for that consultant to get the head of HR and the head of IT and the head of operations and CFO all aligned sometimes with your coaching to set it up for success. But that's one way definitely to leverage a third party.
So what are some of the elements of a business justification that you guys receive or review? Are there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different things. I think it's revenue driving, so like top line focus. I think the other one is operational efficiency, savings from that perspective. But I think a bigger one that's maybe a little bit harder to justify is preventative risk or kind of looking ahead. As I mentioned earlier, I work a lot in financial services and banks. Another big use case is fraud prevention. So fraud continues to be obviously pervasive in that space. Feels like the bad guys are getting a little bit ahead at the moment in that from that perspective, given kind of all the focus on that space. But using different AI tools, being able to kind of understand the patterns, the characteristics to prevent those losses are huge. Just preventing just one big loss is an easy sort of justification for some of these, and based on kind of what the numbers look like and those types of things. So just to give you an example, I think that's another one where I think we often overlook some of those risk elements or risk avoidance justification, but I think that's a huge one, within your enterprises, within your organizations.
So Kevin, you had mentioned change management. How do you embed AI or, interest or excitement around AI within an organization?
So there's several ways, and West Monroe's internally is good at one and not the other. We are very good in terms of the initial case and telling the story and the why, and getting launched in terms of that first critical piece. We get traction faster than probably like to look at your metrics. I know we're in the top quartile on all three measures in terms of Moveworks. We get that because of how we communicate and how we position it and how we understand our users and our culture. We're less good at continuing that arc going because I said we are tool obsessed, so we kind of move on to the next thing. It's like, oh, remember this West Monroe bot that launched 2 years ago? We got all that progress a year, and now it's changed so much. We have all this other stuff to do. So that's a little harder. You do have to think about who those advocates are. We have had built change facilitators across the organization areas. While we are all one and very collaborative, we do have each practice. So we go into practices and offices and talk to those. But that part's a little harder for us.
Yeah.
Maybe one thing I would add, which I know works at West Monroe, is a good old fashioned like contests, something competitive, gamification. All of you, know your organizations and whether that will fly or not. But at West Monroe, a good contest really gets everybody competitive, and the best ideas come out of that. So maybe through the best use cases could be something where you get everybody involved in that, from that perspective to come up with ideas. Or maybe for those of you that are kind of more directly in a client services business where you're dealing with clients every day, the best example of something that could improve the customer experience for your customer or for your end user, whatever that may look like. It sounds like a very simple, it's not rocket science, but we found that to be very successful in driving the outcomes we're trying to achieve.
We ran a very successful AI week with that. We hyped some things and did a hackathon, and then we did rewards first, second, and third. And Moveworks this morning, you announced some of them.
Yeah.
So same sort of technique.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was talking to some executives last night, we're going through this evolution. We've talked about bot sprawl with many of my customers. Now we may be facing agent sprawl, right, with agentic AI. How do you balance? What recommendation advice do you have in terms of balancing innovation, progression, but not too many use cases, that agent sprawl? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I feel like I already addressed this, so forgive me if I'm kind of going through some stuff we already talked about. But I think getting some things in place, getting some wins, making sure they're in a business as usual sort of environment, working and functioning. Sometimes I work with clients who are very future focused and are building for the future and building for 3 years, 4 years from now, which is great and amazing and everything. But those that are in the business day to day are suffering because they're always thinking about the future and can't get the loan across the finish line that needs to be done today, kind of in the here and now in the current state to run the business day to day. So I think a balance between that and not being too future focused, but making sure, hey, in the next 90 to 180 days, can we see some wins and track and measure success? Frankly, in our business, I see a lot more on that end of the spectrum where it's kind of slow to get started, where we're kind of in the early first few miles of the marathon, so to speak. But I think if your organization is seeing some of that fatigue, I think there's an opportunity maybe, and I know it's hard in a lot of organizations that are hard charging, to slow down a little bit and start to show some results and success without fatiguing your team.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, change fatigue is real. So
Yeah.
one of the first things to do is make sure that the things that you're working on, people don't see 1,000 things, they see 4 major initiatives, right? They can wrap their head around the 3 to 5, and you can put those in there so it doesn't feel like that. Structure, allowing change to set, and having adoption measures, and having stage gates in terms of when you get to a certain point, when you release the next. If you can do some structure stuff like that. We haven't gone down this path yet in terms of agile, but I'd love to eventually be down the SAFe model, where you actually do 5 sprints and then you have 3 weeks of planning and then 5, right? That kind of thing. We do structured times for planning and some rest, but if you do it organizationally, it will also help with that.
Sure. Any success that you want to highlight with your initiatives?
I mean, the biggest thing for us, if I think about service, and this goes all the way to the top level, if I go back to the Wayback Machine of January 2023, and if I thought about just the third-party spend that we did with our managed services provider at a monthly cost, and then implementing Moveworks, shifting some resources, doing some other automation, probably a slew of several initiatives, and our vendors. If I fast forward to September of 2025, when it's all said and done, we will have dropped 40% in savings in SG&A, which translates to $1.4 million a year. So.
Cool. Any parting advice before we open up to Q&A?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, you covered a lot. Yeah.
No, the thing that comes to mind for me is there is still some sensitivity, I think, about this. It's I have a lot of clients who tell me, we're staying away from AI. We're going to stay on the sidelines. And I tell them, it's already here. It's already within your 4 walls. The train's left the station. So making sure you've got the right policies and governance in place to be able to, again, get the most out of it and frankly, be competitive. If you're not going to adopt this, your competitors will, and you'll be left behind, and you'll be spending, more than 40% more. You won't be getting those savings, to be able to capture those. So I think making sure you can address some of that, I think is important for all of you. As I think about what I would do if I were in all of your shoes, being able to kind of address the sensitivities around privacy, compliance, those sorts of things, and continue to make sure you've got the right answers and the good answers for that. And it's not unlike any other sort of third parties that you work with today that you rely on to run your organization, and making sure you've got the right sort of SLAs or protocols or engagement models in place to manage that. I think that's a big part of the governance too. Again, especially in some of the industries I work in, the kind of the third party risk, the vendor procurement sort of risk perspective, making sure you're ready to address some of those things. And again, being a champion for this within your organization, and the benefits and the advantages, I think are huge.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, it's as much a people and culture challenge here, and a little trigger warning for a dad joke. I mean, we talked earlier this morning about it, about meeting people where they're at, because it's really hard to meet them where they're not, right? So really understand your culture, your people, what they're trying to do, how they're going to leverage the technology. That's the only way you're going to drive adoption and drive change.
Yeah, makes sense. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, she over here.
So looking at the that's up on the screen right now, how do you bring all of that together? Like, we've got an AI council at my company, and we do the governance, and we do the support, but somebody else is doing the oversight. We've got another team doing perform. Like, how do you bring all of those together? Like, what does that actually look like? Like, does it look like an organization that is set up where it's these people's jobs, or is it a portion of people's jobs? Do you bring them together casually once a month? Do you have larger working groups? Like, what does it actually look like?
Yeah.
It's just a picture.
Yeah. No, it's a totally fair question, and frankly, when we were putting this together, I struggled with it because every organization operates a little bit differently. So maybe I'll give you one example. It's not a full-time job for everybody that's part of the committee. I think we see organizations that often have some sort of technology committee or an innovation committee, and the AI kind of governance kind of fits within that. It could be a monthly steering committee where you've got representation, at a more senior level from various business units within your organization that are there to bring ideas and opine on different things. And then I think as that group kind of sets the direction and make sure the priorities align with the overall organizational strategy, then you hopefully have more dedicated teams underneath it that are going out and executing and making that happen, and then kind of reporting back to that group. And I think, again, that are doing the monitoring, the measuring, and then also working, hopefully, and I know in every organization probably has this dialed up or dialed down a little bit more, but with your partners in communication and training and those sorts of things to hopefully make this all come together and make sure your teams internally understand what's available to them, how they can use it, what the benefits are. I'm glad Kevin mentioned the certifications and like badges and getting people trained up. Another sort of way to get people using it and getting credit for the knowledge they've gained in it. I think that's another element that's important too.
Actually, anyone in the audience have governance and thoughts on how they run it?
Well, I was just going to say I am the communication
Okay.
person.
So you do everything.
Where we're missing it is the platform. Like the teams that are actually doing the coding and implementing, they are completely separate, disconnected.
Yeah.
And you guys.
I think that's really common. Ultimately, we don't usually have like the developers or the technologists that are maybe writing the communications or things like that. I don't have the silver bullet, but I think a culture of that partnership, I think, is really important. And I think, frankly, from your experience, I think you have to be that champion to say, okay, what are translate what's being built and delivered into what's the benefit to the individual using it, the organization? How do you kind of communicate that? So, maybe that's something we could talk a little bit more after about, like your specific challenges. But I think, that's what I typically see is hopefully the communications folks, not putting too much pressure on you, are helping to bring it all to life and telling the story, frankly, for the organization.
Yeah, I'd be curious what the partnerships look like in the area in terms of if there's different departments that are doing some of that development. I'd be interested in what the incentives and the performance measures are to make them look good, because frankly, to do it well, as we said, to really impact change, you actually have to change behavior, and the communication side of that should be enabling them to achieve whatever their goals are. So if their goals aren't just to put a piece of code out here, but to actually get a certain level of adoption that drives a certain level of efficiency in a process or dollars out, they need you. My guess is that part isn't done well in your organization. That should be defined better.
Thank you. Yeah, any other questions?
Well, not a question, I just wanted to add a little bit more to that. The way we do it, and here at Honeywell, my colleague here, the way we connect the communications team and the development team is actually putting some ownership on the use case initiator. What I mean is the person who has the idea within the company has a stake into the communication, because we will not put it live until they also give us a draft of how they would be, communicating to the rest of their users. So it will go live until you build the draft with us. And what's in for our technical team is giving you visibility on the work you're doing. So they see the incentive, they see the reason why we need to communicate that, because it kind of gives a spotlight to their work. So that's
great.
those.
We talk about at West Monroe about co-creating with our clients. That's exactly it right there.
Yeah. We'll do one more, one in the back here and then one there. How's that? Okay.
Yeah, so our CEO and senior leadership, they said, oh, we need to use AI in our company with everything we're doing, look to automate everything. And so I'm in IT, and so IT and security is like, okay, well, everybody just like went all these different directions using AI or whatever, using DeepSeek or wherever, and we have no boundaries or guidelines for what's the proper use of AI, and that's why I attended this session here. And so I'm trying to evangelize the thought to our senior leaderships, like, look, we need to put some boundaries on here, but not only to just control it, but also to help drive adoption of it for other teams who don't know what the possibilities are, and help them along to start using AI. So any thoughts on how to get started on it when senior leadership said, yeah, use AI, but like now we need to, yeah, we need to put some guidance around this. And I'm trying to sell that to the senior leadership.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like I've continued to hear that theme quite a bit, where there's a lot of sponsorship and support at the top of the house a lot of the time, but that kind of, as you start to maybe go down to throughout the organization, there becomes more concern, like, how are we going to make this happen? Some sensitivity around it. Is it going to, frankly, is this going to make my job obsolete? Like those sorts of things. So I think some of the things we've talked about, we've called it at West Monroe kind of responsible AI, and kind of thinking about how do we roll this out responsibly. And it's got a few different, some of those different factors we've talked about before, where maybe, again, starting a little bit smaller, pick one line of business to start with versus kind of casting a wide net, anchoring back to what are we trying to achieve? What's the justification for this? How do we kind of roll it out over time? I like Kevin's point around kind of having the right stage gates sort of along the way to communicate success. We did have one more visual. I don't know if this is helpful, but kind of summarizes some of the other things we've talked about earlier today to kind of set it up in the right way. So if this is helpful to kind of think about how you identify the right use cases, how do you have the right controls in place within your organization? Where might there be challenges with oversight or governance if you kind of cast too wide of a net, where it doesn't, where it's not successful? I mean, hopefully some of the things we talked about today, where again, if you kind of go too broad but don't see enough success or don't track or measure it, you might be able to, again, justify to your leadership, hey, we can't just, do this wherever somebody raises their hand and wants to do it, that there's some, rules of the road around it ultimately.
I would ask, like, are they evaluating the second bucket here, the second circle, the risk, right? The reason being is if you use an open version of an LLM, you put information in there, it becomes part of that training data, right? So if your leadership's saying, oh yeah, go wild, and you're putting proprietary information like some of the organizations have done, you are creating a risk for your organization.
Right.
So do you push back and do you say, okay, have we considered this before we say, hey, use whatever, DeepSeek, open ChatGPT, and so on? So I think that is a key piece. And if you look at it, there's two circles related to risk.
Yeah, I think this was developed for banking originally. So depending on what kind of organization you are, you might have a further risk context. For me, working with professional services, business technology, we kind of have a little bit more of an innovation context. So it really does depend on the where. I would suggest, it sounds like it's complete chaos going in 17 different directions. As much as possible, I mean, this takes leadership. So people need to get in a room together and get facilitated and say, and align on the why. Let's get some ground rules. Let's do a vision and values, as what we would call it at West Monroe, and come out of that day-long session with at least the guardrails. But they got to get in a room to do it. Otherwise, it's just going to continue down that path.
Can we do this? I promised one more question, and then I think we have an extended break. So what if we get some snacks and drinks and then come back here and ask more questions? Would that be okay? Yeah, I think you. Are you okay? Okay.
You said snacks.
Yeah. No.
There might be.
Oh.
Hello. Okay, you can hear me. So I'll keep the question short. So our experience with governance has been anything that has a big human element where we have to meet regularly, go through stuff, easy to start, hard to sustain. So any thoughts from you regarding using the technology itself to create more observability and maybe cover at least some part aspects of governance?
So using technology for more observability?
Yeah, observability / governance, because some of the things that was talked about is like communication, adoption. I agree with that. But any experience from your side on that aspect, or even the risk per se? Can we use like tools to assess the risk? Anything that you know, if somebody is using DeepSeek, I mean, I don't have anything against DeepSeek, but we're not supposed to, right? So that kind of observability, creating that, because governance as a concept makes a lot of sense, but it's easier said than done, as you may have experienced yourself.
I would wonder if that's more security versus governance, and maybe they're infused, right? So I know some organizations have blocked certain domains, so you can't access those tools. But
I don't know if this answers your question, but when you brought it up, the first thing I thought about was the monitoring and tracking of the success and using the technology itself to, in a more automated way, share results of how much success there is. So, I mean, the easiest one is usage. Are you seeing more usage over time of the solutions? How are you tracking, again, the other sorts of savings in terms of, are we using the bot? Are we calling someone HR? Are we, those sorts of things, and using the technology itself to help tell us where we might be seeing differences, spikes, or reductions in certain metrics.
okay. Thank you. So let's do this. I will leave the slide up if you guys want to come and take better pictures, and then we can continue the conversation. But yes, I think there are some drinks and snacks outside. All right. So thank you.
Thanks.